The rain that night was relentless. It beat against the windows with force that made my small house groan like it, too, wanted to be somewhere else. The wind whistled through the cracks in the old wooden frames, and each gust seemed to press the cold deeper into my bones. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, sitting alone in the dimly lit living room. Nights like these had a way of magnifying silence, of reminding me how empty a house could feel when you lived alone. I'm Karis, 30 years old. Some days I feel younger than that, as though life still holds surprises waiting to unfold. But on nights like this, with the storm outside and nothing but my own thoughts for company, I feel older, worn down, whether like the paint peeling on my front door. My friends live their lives scattered across different towns and cities, and though I speak to them sometimes, the truth is I've grown used to solitude. I had just set my book aside, deciding to make tea when it happened. 3 sharp knocks at the door. I froze. For a long second, I wasn't sure I'd really heard it over the rain. But then it came again, louder this time, urgent. My heart kicked into a quicker rhythm, thudding in my chest. Who could possibly be out there at this hour, in this weather? I glanced toward the door, the old brass handle gleaming faintly under the low light. I didn't move right away. Something about unexpected visitors at night makes the air feel heavier, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. My mind raced with possibilities. Neighbors in trouble, a lost traveler, or worse, someone with intentions I didn't want to imagine. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home. But the knocking came again, and this time a voice followed it. Please help me. It was hoarse, desperate, the kind of plea that cuts through doubt. I swallowed hard, grabbed the lantern from the side table, and forced my feet toward the door. My hand hovered above the handle. I hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, I pulled it open. The night crashed in with the rain, cold and biting. And there he was, a man, maybe 35 years old, stood on my porch, drenched to the bone. His dark hair clung to his forehead. His jacket sagged heavy with water, and his face looked pale in the lantern glow. He wasn't threatening. He looked exhausted, broken down by the storm. For a heartbeat, fear still gripped me. I didn't know him. His eyes, though, weren't the eyes of someone who wanted to harm. They were wide with need, with something raw and human. I'm sorry, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. My car, it broke down a mile back. Please, could I stay until the storm eases? I stood there, rain splattering against my feet, my mind caught between instinct and compassion. Everything in me screamed to be careful. But another part of me, the part that remembered how loneliness feels on long nights, couldn't turn him away. I looked him over again, his hand shaking slightly, his breath fogging in the cold. He was just a man, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. All right, I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. Come in before you freeze. He let out a sigh, almost collapsing with relief, and stepped inside. The warmth of the house swallowed him slowly, though his wet clothes dripped a small puddle onto the wooden floor. I shut the door quickly, as though closing out not just the storm, but the fear that had been pounding at my chest. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. I studied him in the soft light, and he studied me back, like we were both still deciding what to make of each other. Thank you, he said at last, his voice low, heavy with gratitude. You don't know how much this means. I nodded, trying to shake off the nerves that clung to me. Let's get you warmed up, I murmured, motioning toward the living room. As he followed me in, I couldn't help but think how strange life was. 10 minutes ago, I was alone, resigned to another night with only the storm for company. Now, I had a stranger under my roof, an unexpected story knocking on my door, begging to be let in. And against all reason, I had opened it. The stranger's shoes squelched softly against the wooden floor as I led him into the living room. The fire in the hearth had nearly gone out, but few glowing embers still pulsed faintly in the dark. I crouched down and added some kindling, coaxing the flames back to life until they licked upward with warmth and light. Sit, I said, pointing to the old armchair near the fireplace. He obeyed without hesitation, lowering himself slowly, like every muscle in his body was grateful for the chance to stop shivering. His wet jacket made a damp sound as it pressed against the fabric. I hurried into the kitchen and filled the kettle. My hands moved automatically, though my mind was still racing. A stranger, in my house, at night. The thought made me uneasy, but it was impossible to ignore the human part of me that wanted to make sure he was safe. When I came back, I saw him stretching his hands toward the fire. His fingers were long, trembling faintly, as though the coal had settled deep inside his bones. He looked up at me, managing a small, tired smile. "Thank you," he murmured. "I wouldn't have lasted much longer out there." I gave a brief nod, unsure what to say, and slipped into the kitchen again. From the cupboard, I took out bread, cheese, and the leftover stew I had made the night before. Simple food, but warm. As the stew reheated on the stove, I found myself wondering about him. Who he was, where he was going, why fate had pushed him to my door in the middle of the storm. A few minutes later, I carried the tray back to the living room. The kettle whistled faintly as I poured hot tea into 2 mugs. The smell of stew filled the space, mixing with the crackle of the fire. His eyes lit up at the sight of food, and for a moment I saw a softness there, a glimpse of the boy he must have once been. He reached for the bread, but then paused, glancing at me. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Of course," I said, setting the tray on the small table between us. "Eat." He didn't need to be told twice. He tore into the bread with an urgency that told me just how hungry he was. I sat across from him, sipping my tea, watching as the storm continued to thrash outside the windows. After a few minutes of silence, he leaned back with a sigh. "I should introduce myself," he said, wiping his hands against his damp jacket. "My name's Adrian." "Karis," I offered in return. He nodded. "Karis, that's a good name. Unique." I didn't respond, just gave a faint smile. He seemed to take the hint and went on. "I was driving back from visiting my sister. She lives about 4 hours south of here. I thought I'd beat the storm, but—" He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "Guess I was wrong. My car gave up on me about a mile down the road. Tried to call for help, but there's no signal out here." "That sounds about right," I said. "This stretch is dead for miles. Even the radio struggles." "Figures," he muttered, then rubbed his hands together again, leaning closer to the fire. "When I saw your house, I don't know, it felt like my only chance." I studied him in the firelight. His face, though tired, had a rugged kind of strength. His jawline was sharp, but his eyes betrayed a gentleness, brown, warm, though shadowed by exhaustion. "Lucky for you," I said slowly. "I was home." "Lucky for me," he echoed, a note of sincerity in his voice that made me glance away. Still, the air between us was thick with caution. I couldn't help but keep my guard up, even as I watched him soften with every bite of food and every sip of tea. He was a stranger, and trust wasn't something that bloomed overnight. After a pause, he spoke again. "I don't usually do this. Show up at someone's door in the middle of the night. I guess the storm stripped me of pride. Funny, isn't it? How desperation makes us forget about appearances." His words struck something in me. I looked down at my mug, fingers tightening around the ceramic. "I know what you mean," I admitted quietly. "Loneliness has a way of doing that, too." When I lifted my eyes, his gaze was fixed on me, steady, searching. It felt as though he was trying to peel back the layers I'd wrapped around myself. "Do you live here alone?" he asked gently. "Yes." The word came out sharper than I intended, but he didn't flinch. He just nodded, as though he understood more than I wanted to reveal. The fire crackled between us, and the storm howled against the windows, but for a moment, none of it mattered. There was only the 2 of us, 2 men pulled into the same space by chance, testing the boundaries between fear and trust. He set his mug down carefully and leaned back in the chair. "I'm grateful, Karis. More than I can say. I know you didn't have to let me in. Not in this world. Not in times like these." I studied him again. His words carried a kind of weight, as if he'd seen enough of life to know that kindness was rare. And maybe that's what made me soften, just a little. "You looked like you needed it," I said simply. And for the first time that night, Adrian smiled, a real one, warm and unguarded. It spread across his tired features and lit up the room more than the fire ever could. Something in my chest shifted, just slightly. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew this. The storm outside wasn't the only thing changing the night. When the food was gone and the fire burned brighter, Adrian shifted in his chair. A faint wind crossed his face. So quick I almost missed it. But then he tried to stand, and I saw the way his body faltered, the way his left leg buckled slightly beneath him. "You're hurt," I said, my voice sharper with concern than I intended. He waved me off, but the way he leaned against a chair told me otherwise. "It's nothing. Just—" I slipped in the mud while trying to push the car. "I'll be fine." "Sit back down," I insisted. "You're dripping on my floor, and if you think I'm letting you limp around on a stormy night, you don't know me." He blinked at me, surprised, then gave a tired chuckle and lowered himself again. All right. You win." I left him by the fire and went to fetch my small first aid kit from the cupboard. When I returned, I knelt down in front of him. His boot was caked with mud, the laces frayed and soaked through. "Take it off," I said. "I can manage." "Take it off," I repeated firmly, meeting his eyes. He hesitated, then slowly pulled at the laces. The boot slid off with a squelch, and he peeled away the wet sock beneath. That's when I saw it, a deep scrape running across his shin, angry and raw, with dry blood crusting at the edges. I drew in a breath. "You call this nothing?" He winced more at my tone than the wound. "I've had worse." "Really? Well, now you have me," I muttered, dipping cotton in antiseptic. "Hold still." The smell of spirit filled the room as I pressed the cloth gently against his skin. He hissed, sharp and sudden, gripping the armrest until his knuckles went white. "Sorry," I said quickly. "No, don't be," he managed through clenched teeth. "I know it's necessary." I worked carefully, cleaning away the dirt and blood, wrapping the wound in clean gauze. My hands moved with practiced ease. I'd always been the one patching up small accidents around the house, and somehow it felt natural to care for someone else this way. When I was done, I sat back on my heels. "There," I said softly. "That should keep you from limping too badly." Adrian looked down at his leg, then back at me. His eyes lingered, searching mine. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But you're under my roof now. That makes you my responsibility, at least for tonight." For a long moment, neither of us looked away. The fire crackled between us, casting shadows on the walls, and the storm outside seemed to fade into background noise. There was something in his eyes, gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, a kind of recognition. I cleared my throat and rose to my feet. "You'll need to rest. The couch won't be enough for that leg, and I only have one proper bed." He frowned. "Karis, I can't take your bed. That's too much." "Then we'll share it," I said matter-of-factly. "The couch is too short, and you'll wake up worse than before. It's a big enough bed. We'll manage." Silence stretched between us. His lips parted as though to protest again, but then he closed them, studying me with that same searching look. Finally, he nodded. "If you're sure." I wouldn't have said it otherwise. We made our way down the short hallway, the wooden floor creaking under our steps. I opened the door to my room, revealing a modest space, a double bed, neatly made, with an extra blanket folded at the foot. A small nightstand held a lamp, and the window rattled faintly against the storm. Adrian paused at the threshold. "Feels intrusive," he murmured. "Better than pneumonia," I countered, moving the switch on the lamp. I handed him a towel and an old shirt of mine to change into. He took them with a quiet, almost humbled thank you, then turned his back as I gave him privacy. When he finally slipped into the shirt, it hung loose on him, but it was dry. He looked oddly at home in it. We settled into the bed with awkward care, each taking a side. The mattress dipped beneath our combined weight, and the blankets rustled as we pulled them up. For a moment, I lay stiff, my back turned slightly toward him, every sense alert to the fact that I wasn't alone in the space I'd slept in by myself for years. The storm howled, rattling the windows, but inside the room, silence pressed heavier than the wind. I could hear his breathing, slow, steady, a little uneven as he shifted to find comfort. "Karis," he said softly after a while. "Yes." "Thank you. For the food, the fire, the bed." His voice faltered, dipped into something more fragile. "It's been a long time since anyone cared like that." His words lingered in the dark. I stared at the ceiling, my throat tight, unsure how to respond. Finally, I whispered, "You don't have to thank me. Sometimes we all need a place to rest." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, quiet, filled with something unspoken but understood. I felt him shift again, and though he kept his distance, there was a nearness that settled between us, a fragile thread stretched across the mattress, pulling us into the same orbit. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy. The storm outside raged on, but in that bed, with the stranger-turned guest breathing softly beside me, the world felt a little less cold. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but that night, in the warmth of shared silence, I wasn't alone. Morning crept in slowly, a pale gray light filtering through the curtains. The storm had eased sometime during the night, though the wind still whispered against the glass. I stirred beneath the blankets, warm and half-dreaming, reluctant to wake, and then I realized I couldn't move. Something heavy pressed against me. My eyes snapped open, and in that bleary moment between sleep and awareness, my breath caught in my throat. Adrian was there, on top of me. His weight pinned me gently, not crushing but undeniable. His face hovered close, his expression raw, almost desperate. For a flash of panic, my body stiffened. My heart pounded loud enough I thought he could hear it. "What?" The word rasped out, broken by confusion. He froze. His eyes widened, as though he had been caught in something he hadn't intended me to see. For a moment, I thought he would retreat, pull back, laugh it off as some mistake. But instead, his shoulders slumped, and a shudder ran through him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. I didn't mean to scare you." My pulse still raised, but I saw it then. His trembling hands braced on either side of me, his lips pressed tight as if holding back more than words. He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't even touching me beyond the weight of his body, leaning forward. He looked broken. "Adrian," I said carefully, still trying to catch up to the moment. "What's going on?" His head dropped, his forehead almost brushing my shoulder. His breath came uneven, ragged. I woke up, and for the first time in years, I wasn't cold. I wasn't empty. And then I saw you there, sleeping, after everything you did last night, feeding me, tending to me, giving me shelter, and I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to be closer, even if just for a second. The words tumbled out of him, shaky and unguarded, like a dam finally breaking. I felt the tremor in his arms as he tried to steady himself. "You don't understand," he went on, voice low and raw. "I've been alone for so long. People pass you by on the road. They don't stop. They don't care. You start to think, maybe you don't matter at all. And then someone like you opens their door, and it feels like the world isn't as cruel as you thought." Something in my chest loosened. The fear that had sparked in me softened into something else. Understanding, maybe, or compassion. I could see it clearly now. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was drowning in a loneliness I knew too well, and clinging to the first hand that had pulled him from the storm. I let out a slow breath. "Adrian, you should have said that instead of nearly giving me a heart attack." That startled a broken laugh out of him. He lifted his head, his eyes shining, damp in a way that wasn't from the rain. "I know. I'm sorry. I just didn't know how." Carefully, I shifted beneath him until he eased back enough to let me sit up. He perched at the edge of the bed, his hands gripping his knees like he needed to anchor himself. His whole body looked heavy, not with exhaustion, but with years of carrying burdens alone. I studied him in the quiet. The morning light softened the edges of his face, and in that fragile stillness, he looked younger somehow, like a man who had been holding himself together for too long. "You're not the only one who knows what it feels like," I said finally. My voice was low but steady. "Loneliness eats at you, makes you do things you don't expect. I live with it too. Every day. His eyes lifted to mine, startled. There was no judgment there, only recognition, as though my words had given him permission to breathe. I guess, he said slowly, we both needed someone to remind us we're not invisible. I nodded. The tension that filled the room when I first woke was gone now, replaced by something unspoken but warm. Not trust, not yet, but an understanding, fragile and real. For a while, neither of us moved. The house creaked around us, the world settling into morning, and I realized with a quiet certainty that whatever strange turn the night had taken, Adrian's intentions hadn't been harmful. They had been human. Overwhelming, yes. Misplaced, maybe, but human. I reached out, resting a hand lightly on his arm. He flinched at first, then relaxed, his shoulders sagging as though that small gesture steadied him more than words ever could. It's all right, I said gently. You don't have to explain everything right now. Just breathe. You're safe here. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, and for the first time since I'd met him, he let his eyes close and simply sat there, like someone finally allowed to put down their armor. And in that moment, the storm felt like a distant memory. What remained was a fragile, undeniable truth. Two strangers, bound not by chance alone, but by the simple, aching need to be seen. By the time the morning stretched fully into day, the storm had quieted. The rain no longer battered against the windows, though the world outside was still drenched, the ground heavy with mud and puddles that shimmered under a pale sky. The air smelled different, cleaner, sharper, as though the storm had rinsed everything it touched. Adrian and I stood by the doorway, looking out at the road. His car was barely visible down the bend. It had lifted, a lonely silhouette against a washed-out landscape. Think it'll start? I asked. He shook his head. Not without a tow. And I doubt anyone's coming out here today. Roads are probably flooded further down. I should have been frustrated, maybe even resentful, that this stranger would be in my house for longer than I planned. But instead, I felt something else, an odd sense of relief. The thought of him leaving so soon, after last night's fragile honesty, sat heavy in my chest. Then you'll have to stay another day, I said simply, shutting the door against the damp air. Adrian gave me a small, almost sheepish smile. If you don't mind. I don't, I said before I could think twice. And I meant it. The day unfolded gently, unhurried. The kind of day where time didn't feel like it belonged to anyone but us. We started in the kitchen, cobbling together breakfast from whatever I had. Eggs, a bit of bread toasted over pan, leftover tea reheated. Adrian insisted on helping, though he winced now and then when his injured leg reminded him of its presence. You're going to make it worse, I scolded, snatching the pan from his hands. He grinned at me, a grin that made something in me loosen. You don't like help, do you? I don't like guests limping around my kitchen pretending they're fine, I countered. Ah, he said, leaning against the counter, arms folded. So it's not me, it's just that you're a control freak. I tried not to smile, but the corners of my mouth betrayed me. Eat your eggs, Adrian. He laughed then, a Rayal laugh, and the sound filled the small kitchen like sunshine after the storm. The hours passed with an ease I hadn't expected. After breakfast, we set about small tasks, tending to firewood, tidying the living room, even playing a round of cards from an old deck I'd tucked away in a drawer. He cheated shamelessly, and I called him out for it every time, but somehow I still lost more hands than I won. At one point, we found ourselves sitting side by the window, watching the world drip dry. He leaned back in the chair, long legs stretched out, his bandaged shin propped on a stool. I used to love days like this, he admitted quietly. After a storm, everything feels possible again. I glanced at him, caught off guard by the softness in his tone. What changed? His eyes stayed on the window. Life. Distance. Losing people. He shrugged, but the weight in his shoulders gave him away. You stop noticing beauty when you've trained yourself not to expect it. Something in me stirred at his words. I knew that feeling all too well. Maybe that's why the storm brought you here, I said before I could stop myself. To remind you. He turned then, meeting my gaze. For a second, The air between us tightened, like we were standing at the edge of something unspoken. Then he gave a faint smile, one that reached his eyes this time. Maybe it reminded us both. By late afternoon, the sun had managed a breakthrough, casting light across the field beyond. The house glowed warmer, less haunted by the night before. We found ourselves in the kitchen again, cobbling together dinner this time. He chopped vegetables clumsily, and I pretended not to notice. When he dropped a piece of carrot and muttered a curse, I couldn't help laughing. "What?" he asked, feigning offense. "You're terrible at this." Harsh words from someone who nearly burned toast this morning. I threw a dish towel at him, and he dodged it, grinning. The moment was light, playful, but beneath it ran a current I couldn't ignore, the steady rhythm of connection weaving tighter between us. Over dinner, conversation drifted into deeper waters. He told me about his sister, how she'd raised him when their parents couldn't, about the years he spent drifting from place to place, always moving, never settling. I listened, really listened, and when he faltered, I offered pieces of myself too. My solitude, my quiet routines, the way the house had started to feel more like a shell than a home. Words I rarely shared with anyone found their way out, carried by the ease of his presence. The more we spoke, the lighter I felt, as though I had been carrying my own silence like a wound, and now someone was finally tending to it. That night, when we returned to the bedroom, it was different from the night before. The air wasn't heavy with hesitation. We didn't speak much as we settled into the bed again, but the silence between us was warmer now, threaded with the laughter and stories we had shared throughout the day. I lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. It struck me then how quickly things had shifted. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been a stranger at my door. Now, he felt like something else entirely. I couldn't name it yet, but as my eyes drifted shut, I knew one thing for certain. This connection, unexpected as it was, mattered more than I was ready to admit. And maybe, just maybe, the storm had carried him to me for a reason. The night felt softer than the one before, as though even the sky had learned to loosen its grip. The storm had left behind a stillness that wrapped itself around the house, a quiet so profound it made every sound within the walls seem sharper. The crackle of the fire, the faint clink of cups on the table, the steady rhythm of two people breathing in the same room. We sat by the hearth after dinner, a pot of tea between us, the glow of the flames painting his face in warm light. Adrian looked less like a stranded traveler tonight, and more like someone who belonged here, as though the house had been waiting for him all along. For a while we sat in silence, but it wasn't the heavy, uncertain kind we had shared when he first arrived. This silence was companionable, like an old quilt draped across our shoulders. He broke it first. "You ever feel like your life isn't really yours?" His voice was low, thoughtful. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the fire, as though the answer might be hiding in the shifting embers. I leaned back in my chair, more often than I'd like to admit. Adrian exhaled a laugh, though it wasn't quite humor. I've spent years moving from place to place, job to job, always restless, always convinced the next town or the next plan would finally fit. But it never did. And now, I'm 34, with nothing to show except a trail of half-finished attempts. I let the words settle. He wasn't asking for pity. He was handing me a piece of himself, raw and unpolished. "What were you chasing?" I asked gently. His eyes flicked to mine then, searching. A sense of purpose, I guess. A reason to stay. Somewhere or someone that made me want to stop running. He hesitated, then shook his head, smiling faintly. I sound ridiculous. "You don't," I said quickly. "You sound human." Something softened in his expression, a quiet gratitude. We talked for a long time after that. He told me about his dreams, how he once wanted to be a writer, how he filled notebook after notebook with stories but never showed them to anyone. He spoke of regrets, of moments when fear made him step back instead of forward, of people he had loved and lost because he couldn't bring himself to stay. I listened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of another person's honesty pressing against my own walls. When the quiet stretched again, it was my turn. "You know," I said slowly, "you're not the only one who feels like they've been drifting." Adrian tilted his head, waiting. I live here alone. By choice, or at least that's what I tell myself. It's easier not to need anyone. Easier not to risk being left. But lately, the silence has been louder than I can bear. Some days, I catch myself staring at the walls and wondering if this is all there is, if I'll keep waking up to empty rooms until I can't anymore. The words tumbled out more freely than I expected, like they had been waiting for someone willing to hold them. My throat tightened, but I didn't stop. I think I've been afraid of wanting more, I admitted, because if I wanted it, I'd have to face the possibility of not finding it. Adrian's eyes didn't waver. He didn't flinch from the weight of what I'd given him. Instead, he reached across the small table, his hand resting on mine. His palm was warm, steady. "You found more already," he said softly. The word struck me in the chest. Simple yet undeniable. The night deepened, but neither of us moved to end it. We stayed there, trading truths as though they were lanterns we passed back and forth, each one lighting a new corner of the darkness. He told me about the fear of never belonging. I told him about the ache of always belonging to no one. He confessed how much he wanted to write again, to create something that might outlast him. I confessed how much I wanted connection, even though I pretended I didn't. Somewhere between the pauses and the laughter, between the stories of childhood mischief and the unspoken griefs, something shifted. The space between us wasn't space anymore. It was a bridge. At one point, Adrian leaned back in his chair, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Not pity, not curiosity. Something deeper, steadier. "You know," he said slowly, "if my car had broken down anywhere else, I would have called a tow, waited, and left. But it happened here, with you. I can't shake the feeling it wasn't just chance." The air stilled at his words. My heart thudded once hard. "I've been thinking the same," I admitted. "Like the storm brought you." He smiled then, not the guarded smile he'd worn before, but something truer. Then maybe we were meant to find each other in it. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the realization wash over me, that the loneliness I'd carried like a second skin had cracked open the span of 2 days, and a stranger had walked into the hollow places and filled them with warmth. It terrified me. It thrilled me. It felt real. Later, when we finally returned to the bedroom, we didn't lie stiffly on opposite edges of the bed. Instead, we settled closer, his shoulder brushing mine, our breaths falling into rhythm. There were no grand declarations, no promises carved into stone, just a quiet certainty that something had shifted forever. As I closed my eyes, one thought pulsed steady in my chest. This meeting was no accident. It was the beginning of something neither of us had dared to believe in until now. The morning light crept in softly, not harsh or blinding, but warm and gentle, as though even the sun knew not to disturb the peace we had found. For the first time in years, I woke up without the heaviness of solitude pressing on my chest. Instead, there was a calmness, a quiet sense of belonging that filled the air between us. The storm had passed. The clouds had cleared, leaving the world outside washed clean, every leaf shining with leftover droplets. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something new, something fragile yet unshakable. I turned my head slightly and saw him sitting by the window, his injured leg stretched out carefully on a stool. He wasn't looking at me, but at the horizon, where the sun was slowly rising above the damp earth. There was a soft smile on his lips, one I hadn't seen before, and in that smile was both gratitude and hesitation. "Morning," I said quietly, my voice still heavy with sleep. He turned, meeting my eyes, and for a second, it felt as though words weren't needed. "Morning, Karis," he replied, his voice low and steady. Then he gestured toward the window. "It's beautiful out there, isn't it? Like the world is trying again." I joined him at the window, and together we watched the morning unfold. The air smelled of rain and earth, fresh and promising. For once, I wasn't worried about what came next. I just wanted to stay in that moment, with him, where everything felt possible. But life, I knew, always had a way of moving forward. By mid-morning, a local mechanic finally arrived, sent by a neighbor who had noticed a broken-down car on the road. I walked outside with him while the stranger, his name, I realized I hadn't spoken aloud yet, Elias, stood quietly nearby. The mechanic took one look, fiddled under the hood, and told us it would run again after some adjustments. Elias nodded politely, though I saw a shadow flicker across his face. I didn't want to admit it, but the idea of him leaving left a hollow ache in my chest. The house that had been so full last night suddenly seemed to shrink back into its old emptiness. As the mechanic worked, Elias turned to me. I guess this means I'll be on my way soon. His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed something heavier. I swallowed, unsure what to say. Yeah, I suppose. A pause. Then, with a softness that caught me off guard, he added, "But Karis, last night, yesterday, these moments, they've meant more to me than you know. I came here as a stranded traveler, but somehow I found something I didn't even realize I was searching for." His words struck deep, as though they'd been waiting in my own heart too, only unspoken. I felt my throat tighten, but I managed to respond. "You're not the only one. I thought I was just helping a stranger. I didn't expect to find connection or comfort. Not like this." He smiled, that same soft, hesitant smile I'd seen earlier. Maybe storms don't always bring destruction. Sometimes they bring you exactly where you need to be. The mechanic finished his work, and the car coughed back to life. Elias tested it, nodding in satisfaction, but he didn't climb in right away. Instead, he lingered by the door, looking at me as though memorizing my face, my home, this strange miracle of a night. "I don't know where life will take me next," he said finally, "but I know this. Meeting you wasn't just chance. I'll carry this with me. Always." I felt something stir in me. Hope, fragile yet strong enough to change the shape of my loneliness. "And I'll be here," I replied, "if the road ever leads you back." He reached out, squeezing my shoulder firmly, a touch that said more than words ever could. Then, with one last glance, he got into his car. The engine roared softly, steady now, and I watched as he drove down the road until the bend swallowed him from sight. Yet I didn't feel abandoned. Not this time. Because I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. As I stepped back inside my home, the quiet no longer pressing like before. Instead, it hummed with memory, with possibility. The storm had brought Elias to my door, but it had also brought me something far greater. The reminder that even in the darkest, loneliest nights, connection can find us when we least expect it. And as I sat down, watching the sunlight spill across the floorboards, I whispered to myself, almost smiling, sometimes the storm is just the way love arrives.